everybody. We will get this meeting started. If we can please do a roll call, Adila. Tanya Budi.
Here.
Tanya.
Did you hear me? Here.
Mendoza. Here. Hilpern.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Cartha. Here. Rebecca? Oh, Joey. Okay. Joey, can you please do the approval of the meeting agenda?
I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented. Second.
Tanya Budi.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Hilpern.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Cartha? Yes. And we will move on to our high five recognitions.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to announce tonight the high five recognition for the month of February and the month of March. So we've got 4 wonderful colleagues that we're going to highlight tonight, and we will start with February. So we have really a lot to celebrate tonight as we continue our high five celebrating excellence in District 65 staff recognition program, which honors the tremendous work of our licensed staff members and educational support staff members. Due to the cancellation of our February meeting, tonight we recognize both our February and March recipients. Special thanks go to all who submitted nominations. They continue to come in, and we look forward to recognizing 2 more staff members monthly through May. Before we start, I want to give a shout out to the First Bank and Trust for their generous sponsorship of the High Five program. Through this sponsorship, we are able to provide our staff with a $75 Visa gift card, a frame recognition certificate, and an invite to a celebratory luncheon for all of the year's recipients in May. I would now like to invite our February recipients to the podium up here. Mr. Del Creighton, head custodian at Kingsley Elementary. And Miss Sarah Zalonis, 3rd grade teacher at King Arts. Mr. Creighton has been a valued member of the District 65 team for almost 20 years. He was nominated by Katie Spiro, who will also join us at the podium to share some remarks. Katie? Katie?
Okay, so hopefully I'm going to try not to cry, because we all know when I come in front of the school board, I seem to cry. But I wanted to let everyone know I'm so excited to publicly be able to thank and recognize Del Creighton. As the head custodian at Kingsley, he keeps the building running smooth, looking impeccable, and welcoming students and staff, as well as visitors, in his trademark friendly and calm manner. Okay, I'm going to try not to get emotional. The reason I nominated him, though, has nothing to do with his top-notch custodial skills. I have 2 children at Kingsley. Martha is in 1st grade. Max is in 3rd grade. My kids love Kingsley. Thank you to all of you back there. Most importantly, they love to go to school most every day. For me, this is especially important because our son, Max, has autism, and there are many reasons why he might not love going to school. Max is currently in a 3rd grade classroom with the support of a 1-to-1 teaching assistant, and none of this would be possible without the assistance of all the incredible staff at Kingsley. While we parents expect the teachers, teaching assistants, related service providers to be active participants in their child's education, IEP, and in Max's case, behavior plan, I hardly entered Kingsley thinking that the custodian would also be an active participant in his behavior plan. With a diagnosis of autism, Max comes to school with some pretty challenging behaviors. Since starting at Kingsley in kindergarten, Del has in some form been a part of Max's behavior plan. Max has had the incentive of spending time with Del, changing light bulbs, and he told me to tell you to make sure that there aren't any out tomorrow, looking for things in repair, etc., at the end of the week for demonstrating good behavior. For many years, the highlight of Max's week was earning the privilege to spend 15 minutes with Mr. Del. Last year, and I'm so sorry, Del, he earned pieces of Del with each day that he met his goal. And Del not only is a great custodian, but he allowed himself to become a puzzle so that my son could earn pieces of his face in order to change my pants. Even when Del has not been actively placed on his behavior plan and IEP, Del has taken the time to check in on both of my children and most importantly, provide a generous, strong role model for them. I'm not sure Del realizes just how much we appreciate everything he has done for Max, and I'm so happy to be able to say thank you to you, Mr. Del.
Thank you so much, Katie, and Mr. Dell, thank you for everything you do, but don't leave. Following our recognition of Ms. Salonis, I'm going to invite our board president, Suniti Kartha, up for a photo with our recipients. Ms. Salonis has also served District 65 and families for nearly 2 decades and was nominated by Omar Ansari, District 65 parent, who is unable to join us tonight. But I'd like to share some remarks on his behalf. Mr. Ansari states, and I quote, "Ms. Salonis nurtures and educates her students, taking the whole child into account. Early in the school year, she makes sure that she knows about each student as an individual and really does her homework to get to know each of them. By the second week of school, she has already reached out to each parent and guardian to introduce herself and to listen to any concerns that they may have. She incorporates a growth mindset into her work in a way that each child leaves the class knowing that if there is a bar, it is reachable. Ms. Salonis goes above and beyond to monitor the progress of students that have moved on from her class as they settle into the 4th grade. She offers an added and always present support for her current students as well as all of her alumni. Her peers often seek her out for guidance and advice. The structured and nurturing classroom that she establishes is one of the district's best examples of ensuring that every child, every day, is offered the best education and the best social and emotional support. So on behalf of the school board and the entire administration and all of your colleagues, I would like to thank both Mr. Creighton and Ms. Salonis for all that they do for Kingsley, King Arts, and the District 65 community. And President Kartha, can you join me as we recognize And the hits just keep on coming. So I would really now like to invite our March recipients to the podium. Ms. Katie Hanchett, psychologist at Dewey and Park Schools, and Mr. Stanley Shannon, paraprofessional at Chute Middle School. So if you come on up. Hanchett has been with the district since 2008. She was nominated by her colleague, Julia Barley, who is here tonight and will join us at the podium to share some remarks. Julia, thank you.
Hello. I have had the pleasure of working with Katie for 8 years, and she is by far the most dedicated psychologist I have ever worked with. Not only does she write very in-depth reports, she also takes the time and energy to explain them accurately and in parent-friendly language in every IEP meeting. She also goes above and beyond. She's at 2 schools, and she's on multiple committees at every school she's at. She participates in our school climate and environment such in a way that you would think she's there every day of the week when she's only there half-time. I couldn't the special ed team couldn't be what it is without Katie. So everyone at Dewey's very lucky to have her. So is Park.
Thank you, Ms. Barley. Mr. Shannon has served District 65 students and families for 20 years now and was also nominated by one of his colleagues, Ms. Kinga Vitek, who could not join us this evening. She offered the following remarks about Mr. Shannon, and I quote, "Stanley is a respected staff member of District 65 community. He has served in the military and is an educator with many talents. He has been a longtime member of the Shute community and has coached the basketball team for the past 17 years. He is also a musician and has volunteered as an audio engineer for many of the all-school musicals and advanced drama performances. He has worked closely with Digital Promise as a storyteller, capturing moments that brilliantly show our teachers bridging the digital gap in our students' lives. Mr. Shannon's patience, positive attitude, and calm demeanor render him to be exceptionally suited for mentoring and teaching middle school students. He treats each student as an individual, both on and off the court. According to the teachers he supports, he makes meaningful connections with the students and cares about the whole student. He is an outstanding advocate and mentor for the students of Shute Middle School, a great colleague, and a lifelong learner. He goes above and beyond on a daily basis, whether it's carrying lunch for a student who is on crutches, or helping calm a distressed child until the nurse gets there, or making yet another student realize education is the ticket to a better future. He does so with a smile on his face. He is an educator every parent wants in their child's classroom. On behalf of the school and the administration and all of the colleagues here at District 65, I'd like to thank both Ms. Hanchett and Mr. Shannon for all that you do for Dewey, Park, and the Shute communities. And President Cartha and I will come and give you your gifts. And the celebration continues because we're going to continue on and recognize several colleagues who have reached the level of national board certification. National board is as high as it gets in the teaching profession. It's a rigorous process that takes a considerable amount of time and highlights the unbelievable skills and competencies of teachers at the highest level in public schools and private schools around this country. Our educators across District 65 are really accomplishing remarkable things when they achieve national board certification, as several did this past December. It's a lengthy and rigorous process, and I could not be more proud or inspired by those who put the many hours in to earn this voluntary and very prestigious certification. I'd like to turn the mic over to Stacy Beardsley, who will share more about the process, and then she will invite the recipients up to be recognized.
If I could ask Rebecca Condon and Marie Breitenstein to come up and join as well. Rebecca and Marie are very important facilitators for national board teachers in our district and have been integral in supporting our educators in this process, initiating and supporting our educators. So I'm going to call up our 6 recipients one at a time. I'm going to ask when we come up if you stay up so we can get a group photo at the end. I just really want to echo Dr. Gorin's comments. National board educators are educators who commit a very significant amount of time over a 2 or 3 year period of time to dig into, reflect upon, and improve instructional practice within their own work. They've worked together as educators. They've done countless hours together and alone in order to think about how to continue to grow and improve their practice in the district. This kind of commitment allows us to continue to provide better and better opportunities for our students, and it has the opportunity to connect and grow amongst the other educators that are partners in their work. The first person I'm going to call up is Taylor Fusinato from Bessie Rhodes. I reached out to the school principals and just asked for a quick kind of summary of some of the contribution or work that they would like to share at the board meeting tonight. And Mr. Condon shared this about Ms. Fusinato. For Ms. Fusinato specifically, it was not a matter of time, it was not a matter of if she would attain her national board certification, but when. Her insatiable love for science, true passion for challenging and accessing student engagement, and her drive for perfecting her craft are inspirational for our students and staff. District 65 is lucky to have her and all of our NBC teachers. Thank you, Taylor. The second teacher I'm going to call up is Emily Stankovic from Nichols. Emily is an active member in the Nichols community. She is the PBIS co-chair coordinator of the Student Ambassadors and Science Department Chair. In the district, she is a professional development leader who runs science professional development on half-days, participated in a pilot group for one-to-one, and is currently piloting the new NGSS-aligned curriculum. She's presented at 2 NSTA conferences and attended Evans STEM to create new STEM projects, as well as worked on summer curriculum projects. Emily demonstrates an endless commitment to creating environments and opportunities that support learning and engagement for her students and through her personal drive to grow and improve. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to call up 3 Haven teachers who worked on this together. So I'm going to call up 3 at one time: Shannon Dangerfield, Daryl Perriman, and Christy Rochelle. And I believe I have one that wasn't able to make it tonight. She's here. She's just in a photo. These Haven Science Department teachers took National Board Certification on as a group. They worked together, planning, taping, writing tirelessly. They encouraged each other when the going was tough and celebrated their accomplishments along the way. Their dedication to always improving instruction for their students is to be commended. There's always something exciting happening in the Haven Science Wing. Thank you, Shannon, Daryl, and Christy, all 3. And our final teacher to acknowledge for completing National Board Certification tonight is Brittany Noble from Willard. Brittany is a caring and creative first grade teacher at Willard. As her National Board Certification demonstrates, she is dedicated to lifelong learning and is constantly taking advantage of professional learning opportunities and looking for new ways to engage her students in meaningful, authentic learning. And you can tell how well it works by her first graders' enthusiasm and growth. Thank you, Brittany. And I believe we're going to gather for one more for a photo.
Sure.
comments?
So I'm going to keep my comments short and actually combine them with the equity comments as well. Just want to remind everybody that spring break starts officially at the end of the day on Friday, woohoo, and we're all looking forward to a break and to enjoying our time away and then the last part of the school year. Just one quick thing on the work that we're doing on equity around the district, and I want to tip my hat to the board for a decision that they made last week. We added 2 additional days of teacher training at the beginning of the school year. So this won't have an impact on students, but, well, will have an impact on students ultimately, but it won't, students won't have to report early. Teachers will have to report 2 days early. And we're able, because of that decision, to move forward on accelerating our training on Beyond Diversity, our equity training, and to work to ensure that all of our teacher corps has an opportunity, those who have not taken the Beyond Diversity training, to actually be trained before the school year starts. And that's a significant accomplishment. We were hoping to get all of this work done of the initial training by the end of the 19-20 school year, or 18-19 school year, or sort of creeping into the 19-20 school year, and we'll be able to accelerate that because of that decision. So stay tuned for that. We have, we're excited about that opportunity, and we move forward in our work on racial equity identity training and its connections to everything we do in the classroom. And those are really my comments. Thank you.
And then board comments? Okay, Anya?
So I wish I didn't necessarily have to make these comments, given how lovely the first part of our meeting was, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't. So recently there was an incident of vandalism with the intent to, I think, emotionally harm the Willard community. The playground equipment was defaced with the N-word. As a member of this governance board, a member of the Willard neighborhood, and as a Black woman, I'm deeply affected. I applaud all who denounced this behavior, those who reported it and acted quickly in response, from the community to the police to the school leadership. I applaud the parent and community members who sought to develop a larger restorative response. And I credit the brave and bold work of our community and the district to explicitly discuss racial justice for priming the ground for such a response. Yet, I also believe we have more to do as an institution to explicitly declare in words and in actions at our schools as anti-racist spaces that are physically and emotionally safe for our children of color, and in the instances of the use of the N-word, safe for Black children and all who are experiencing secondary harm by these instances as well. I believe that we must be clear that racial slurs and words that are generated expressly to reinforce violent dehumanization, threats of harm, subjugation, are not simple insults. The Great Migration in this country did not occur just because Black people were seeking employment. It was to escape terror in the form of unchecked harms that were happening to individuals and communities by dehumanizing beliefs, policies, and language. And the N-word, used by dominant groups towards Black people, carries centuries of threats of violence with it. As a result, our response to their use as a system needs to be significant. As such, I would like to see us make time as a board to discuss how our schools are actively declaring themselves and their values to be anti-racist to children and families, and to one another. If we are not doing that, what are we saying to the children of color and families about how we value their feelings of emotional and physical safety and their responsibility to protect themselves in these instances? What affirming and expansive racial messaging are children and families receiving about the extensive contributions and deep value that Black peoples have brought and continue to bring to the world, our community, and our schools to counter any efforts of dehumanization? What books or facilitated conversations are being used to respond to the symptoms that are showing themselves, those symptoms being racism and racial resentment that exists in this space, whether the majority of us welcome it or not. What is being done to make clear to children and families the gravity of the use of racial slurs and racism and ensure it is explicit that it will not be accepted in our schools? If our children are using racial slurs, whether lightly or with intent to deeply harm, if our children are playing on play equipment where it's been carved, though covered up, I believe that those who are the intended targets need to feel protected and welcome, and those who have witnessed this or feel secondary trauma need to feel supported in responding and also understanding the gravity and the harm that's taken place. And those who have perpetuated need to be clear on what the school environment will and will not accept. The task of making our schools places that are anti-racist and the affirmative content included, such as culturally relevant and inclusive curricular, as well as spaces where explicit and implicit acts of racism are known to be unwelcome, but also responded to when they occur, I believe is part and parcel to building a more equitable institution where physical and emotional safety of all of our children and families, and frankly, our entire community are prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the board during open public meetings. The Board of Education will not permit the voicing of personal attacks against any district employee or board member. Please remember to state your name and that you have 3 minutes to address the board. And we have one speaker, Abdel Shaker.
Hello. Hi. It's Abdel Shakur, and I'm here representing a group called Parents for All People's History. We actually in my group addressed the board, I think it was in September, to talk about the current state of the social studies curriculum in District 65. We were kind of spurred to action sometime last year when I saw an email from my school talking about an event called Pioneer Days. Basically where students were asked to take on the role of being a pioneer during the stealing of native lands in the United States. And I was really deeply encouraged by some of the response from the district in terms of talking about revising social studies curriculum. You know, we've had a lot of conversations with Ms. Beardsley, Ms. Pitts, who's heading up the social studies curriculum. But I was a little disturbed just about a week and a half ago, and I saw an email thread of some parents who were discussing actually going through with Pioneer Days this year, kind of trying to figure out where it was. And so it got our group kind of activated again to thinking about, like, although we've had a lot of good conversations in the district with administration and even some at our schools, and we understand that I think we understand that the administration has reached out to schools and given them some kind of direction about Pioneer Days and those kinds of commemorations. There hasn't really been a public like statement or declaration about these things, and it seems like the kind of thing that can lead to a lot of confusion, and we're talking about emotional harm to students who feel very marginalized and attacked and oppressed in that kind of environment. So just about a week ago, 10 days ago, we started a petition to gather signatures of people who are interested in making sure that everyone in Evanston knows that events like Pioneer Days are not welcome in our district, and we see them as racially offensive and harming children. Just in the same way that there's no acceptable levels of lead in our schools, there should be no acceptable levels of white supremacy in our schools. I'll just read the petition, then I had a follow-up question. We believe that Pioneer Days, with its Eurocentric commemoration of the genocide of Native peoples, has no place in District 65. Our students should learn the history, but with the purpose of critically thinking about and acting to resist all forms of oppression. Our commemorations should prepare our children for a world beyond white supremacy. It should present a range of perspectives with a focus on justice, empathy, and racial equity. And I guess the thing that we're looking for is like more of a public update from the board and administration on where we're at with the curriculum revision, and then even more specifically, this year, is Pioneer Days happening at schools? What kind of direction are schools getting? So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Rebecca, can you take the next?
I move that the Board of Education accept recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the following: personnel appointments, leaves, separations, resolutions for the reduction in force, resolutions for non-renewal of administrative contracts, board and committee meeting minutes for November 2017 through February 2018, recommended policy amendments and Section 9, the Head Start policy, 2017 through 18 board agreements, destruction of the January 2016 closed session audio recording, November, December 2017 list of bills, treasurer's report, and budget amendment, gifts to Dewey, Bessie Rhodes, and Early Childhood Center, Head Start Transportation Bid Award, and the Student Transportation Bid Award.
Is there a discussion before, if we have a question, do we ask before we vote?
Second it, and then we'll have the discussion.
Okay, I second.
Did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask, and I wanted to ask in this forum specifically, for the gifts, I love the PTAs and PTOs, the fundraising and the gifts to the schools. And I just wanted to ask, how does the district, when those gifts are happening, like the Dewey PTA that's giving money for books in Spanish to that school, we have those populations in other buildings as well that maybe don't have the resources. How does the district balance that when we see that those donations are happening?
So that has been an ongoing discussion for about the last year and a half that Biz, Lindsay, Ryan, and I have been working with representatives from PTAs. We've discussed it a little bit, I think, at policy meetings, but haven't yet discussed it because the recommendations are still ongoing, although we have actually come to had some really good discussion, and I think are starting to be at the point where we might be able to make some recommendations on how to move forward on that. So I think the answer thus far has been there hasn't really been a formal process for that, but we are working on it.
The district manages the adoption of curricula, the purchasing of materials, and the distribution of materials. And our goal and what we execute is as balanced as a process as possible to make sure that all of our libraries, all of our classrooms have a wide range of the texts and the books that are recognized. As SUNY recognizes, we absolutely love when the PTAs provide resources for our schools. They tend to be individual and in the individual schools. And so this conversation that's been going on is a really important one to sort of ratchet up the question of, as one school provides resources for its school, can others benefit from that as well? And we're in process as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so can we go ahead and take the vote then?
Tanya Booty,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes.
Can we may I pause
Yes.
on this?
Oh, yes, please do. So, thank you.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I want to take a moment because the board in its approval just approved the appointment of 2 outstanding educators to our principal corps, and I want to take a moment to recognize them and salute them. Replacing Andalib Kelgadi at Dewey Elementary, the board just appointed Donna Sokolowski as the next principal. And if I may, a standing ovation says it all. But what's really marvelous as we've gone through this process and as we've worked together in Dewey and then over the years, what I recognize in Donna is just a keen focus on the highest quality teaching and learning, a lens on equity and the work that we're doing across the district with a deep commitment to all children. Really the finest commitments to school climate, and the love of learning. And I want to just recognize Donna for her professionalism, for taking on the role in an interim basis, to everything that you can feel in the recognition from your fan club behind you. And I want to both professionally and personally congratulate you as you take on this role as a principal here at Dewey Elementary. So thank you. Now, I'd love to hear the same round of applause as the board has just appointed Jillian Anderson as the next principal at Park School. Jillian, you've earned those applause already, even though you don't know the people behind you, actually. Jillian comes to us after spending 12 years at the Kirk School. The Kirk School is in the North Suburban Special Education Organization. It's a fine and wonderful school that, as we've been talking over the last several weeks, and then as we've been visiting with some of the parents from Park School, when I said that we have just an all-star candidate, and I said she teaches, and then she's one of the administrators for the last 5 years at the Kirk School, they were in awe, because Kirk and Park are very similar in their commitments, in their love of children, and the love of addressing the assets that kids bring to the school, indeed, Kirk beat us in basketball this year, so you're now, your colleague from Kirk is clapping, but the appointment, actually, and the president can see this here, says the victory will be ours this year. But really, the victory is ours as we got to know Jill through the interview process. Joyce Bartz and I walked through the school the other day, and one of the remarkable things, and it was lovely to watch interaction of Jill as a professional and somebody who cares with kids and with the adults, getting on her knee, getting to know people very fast, and the reaction that she had on her face and then in words later on was, "This feels like home." And so we want to welcome you to your new home. We want to recognize the expertise that you're bringing to us, and we couldn't be more pleased to have you join the District 65 family. So thank you. I by no means want to put you on the spot, but if you want to say anything, you can, or you can just say ixnay. Oh.
It's like the Academy Awards.
Yeah, right.
First of all, good evening, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Gorn, all the cabinet members, and families and teachers. Last year, I believe I have to put you on the spot here. Last year when I started in my AP position with Dr. Calgatti, who was Mr. Calgatti at the time, one of his first questions to me was, "Tell me about your goal this year." And I didn't prepare for that question, but I responded by saying that my goal was to work side by side with him to build on the culture that he had already been creating at Dewey. This year, I was afforded the opportunity to continue in a leadership role to continue where we left off, building on that very culture. I am very passionate about the work I do with children. I am extremely grateful that I will have the opportunity to work with families and teachers who are equally as passionate about teaching and learning and building community by doing what's best for children. So I want to thank Dr. Calgatti for that partnership last year, and I would like to thank all of you for this opportunity. I am so looking forward to it. It's my March Madness. So
telling my good friend Kim, my colleague from Kirk, that I'm used to bringing a student with me when I'm speaking to the board, so I feel a little empty right now. But I just want to thank the board and Dr. Gorin and your team for this. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm just so thrilled to be joining the park team. Really, I want to work together and really determine ways to help our students learn and grow and find their voice and help reach their own goals. That's really where my passion lies. And as you said, my career has been in serving students with unique needs as a teacher and as an assistant principal. And so the students at Park hold a very special place in my heart. Those are my kids. And I'm very excited to continue to grow and learn. I'm very eager to learn this community, to get to know the students and the staff and the parents, and help us reach our mission and our own goals. Marlene has left some big shoes to fill, and she has served this community really well, and I'm excited to step in and serve this community and these students, and I'll make that my own personal mission. So I feel incredibly supported. I'm very honored by your support, by the support of my friends and new friends, and I'm just very honored and thrilled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. Okay, we will move on to something significantly less interesting and happy than that, but important nonetheless, the school calendar. Joey, would you like to take that?
All right. I move that the Board of Education adopt the proposed 2018-2019 school calendar as presented.
Second.
We discussed this at our working board meeting last week. I don't think anything has changed, so are there any questions or comments?
I love what Dr. Gorin said before about moving those days up front and accelerating some of the equity work. And I think we've talked about like the ability to move from training people or giving people the opportunity to learn about and have those crucial conversations into it moving more throughout the institution. Getting everybody to that same space at the beginning of the school year is awesome.
Agreed, and I think we're just building on the wonderful opening of schools from last year and taking that energy and being able to do this even deeper learning, I think is really fabulous.
And to not pull teachers out of classrooms to be able to do it at the front of the school year.
And again, you know, many thanks to our deck colleagues too for helping to come to this solution on how to be able to move forward with that. So, okay, so can we go ahead and vote on that then?
Tanya Booty,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Then we have Sergio, do you want to take the Head Start continuation application and self-assessment?
I move that the Board of Education approve the Head Start continuation application and self-assessment reports.
Second.
This we also discussed last week. So any additional questions or comments from anybody? Okay, then let's go ahead and vote on that.
Tanya Booty,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Okay, and then we will move on to our discussion item. Anjali and Paul, if you want to take over on the school emergency preparedness overview.
Yeah, let me just start with just a short overview. Safety is our greatest concern. And we know that day in and day out across our schools. And it's never more ever present than over the last couple months or the last couple years as we have faced several tragedies in schools around the country. And as we think about how we run our operations. We, on a regular basis, have very specific plans, very specific drills, very specific procedures, and as we move forward, we are actually expanding those to include more instant alert systems and active training as it relates to the potential for heaven forbid, but a shooter in our district or somebody who's causing just such extreme trouble or threat. So what we want to do tonight is do an overview of the processes and procedures that we follow, and we follow by law and by code, but we follow by moral action, because if we have to put actions to our words about safety being an important piece of the puzzle. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Andalib. Are we working here, or?
No, not quite.
The screen is also.
And then the remote has to.
Give us a second as we. Apologies.
Oh, I guess try it on. User error. First rule of technology.
Does that?
Should we ready, or you wanted to? Okay, no problem.
Can on the other one? I don't know if we can.
It's coming on, so it'll be on the second.
Yeah.
I can begin by just, thank you, Dr. Gorn, for teeing it up a little bit. I wanted to, this evening, I come to this topic both as a former principal, but also as a parent, and really thinking about how important it is for us to always be thinking ahead, planning, preparing, drilling those preparations. And typically, we have provided this board a packet at the end of the year, kind of like, we've done this, and you just kind of move along. But I think it was, as Dr. Warren stated, it was important for us. We really need to know that we are prepared, we are working hard, there's always opportunity for growth, and we are reviewing and reflecting and retraining and reflecting on those plans. And I think that's the most important thing in this, is that we're actively thinking about this and that our principals are actively thinking about this. Tonight, I want to talk about our school crisis management teams, our drills, some of our general relocation planning and reunification planning processes, and then also about our district safety team. Some of the plans that we've been putting together this year, and then last, some next steps and opportunities for growth that we're considering. You know, before I go forward, I want to acknowledge that our emergency responders in Evanston, the fire department and the police department, have been incredible partners. I really mean that. As a principal, I had that partnership much more closely with our SROs in terms of problem solving. And now, as I stepped into this role, I've been fortunate to work very closely with both Chief Addington and the Chief Novak, and thinking, and their deputies and their sergeants, and really thinking through how do we accelerate and develop the best efficiencies for being prepared for any crisis. And I have to tell you that they're thinking as much about this for us as we are thinking about how we partner with them. And we're really fortunate to have their support. We saw this recently at the March 14th. They were the ones who called us immediately. What do we need? What do you guys need? We want to be able to support you as we plan ahead. You know, and it's been, I remember at the beginning of the year when we sat down with the fire department, you know, one of the things that the fire chief said that, you know, when we arrive on the scene, the thing that will make us the happiest, if you tell us, is that you know that everybody's accounted for and there's not a single child in that building. And the thought was really sobering, like, my gosh, you're right, because he said those men who arrive on the scene are ready to run into that building and save a life. You want to see a guy or a woman step up to take it on, you tell them there's somebody in that building and they're going to be in there. And so when you tell us that everybody's accounted for, we know that we reduce the risk for anybody. And it was really a moving moment for me, because I know that in our schools, we drill. We drill for this moment. You know, we start the year maybe at about 3 minutes, and I'm proud to say that by the end of the year, or even within a month, we're down to two minutes. And we can get everybody out of that building with efficiency. And that makes me really, when he said that, I was like, it was kind of a reflection, that moment of like, great, we're working on that, and we're going to do that with all of our drills. In our crisis management plan, all our schools, our principals prepare in the summer, towards the end of the summer, a crisis management workbook. And in this plan, it outlines our preparedness, the way in which we're going to respond, and then our recovery. How do we respond in these situations? It's really an important, the principals will also gather together a crisis management team that may involve a social worker, a health clerk, with different roles and responsibilities in a crisis. These individuals together go through and look at the drills, they plan the drills for the year, they think about the way in which they deal with different situations, they consider other security elements, how are they going to plan together, how they're going to work together, and together really then reflect on each of the drills that they enact during the year. They also make sure that there are plans in place for students who may need extra assistance in a crisis situation, to make sure that there are individuals in the building. We know who in the building may speak a different language if we need to be able to support somebody who has an emergency, whether it's whatever language is in that building. We want to make sure that there's staff and we're prepared to handle those situations as well. We also in this building, in the plan, include all the blueprints. So every classroom in the district has a blueprint, has a packet of the crisis workbook plan that includes the blueprints for where you would go in the event of, let's say, a tornado drill, or where you would go in the event of what is your route for evacuation. So these are some of the things that are included. And then, of course, all the emergency contacts with the district are also listed in personnel. One of the things that we give to the fire department and to the Evanston Police Department is they have these so that they also know when if they were to arrive on the scene, they have a sense of who's in the building, what room number. Somebody said room 217. They have a quick way to look, flip through this and get to it. I'll get to a little bit how we're planning to make that a little quicker than a flip through book, but that is essentially what they've had up until now, and that is our standard practice. Now I'm going to go through a little bit into the drills, just to give you a quick overview. I'm sure you're familiar with these, but we have a number of state mandated under Illinois State Code drills that we have to do every year. So the first one is we now use a coded language. So code yellow, fire drill, evacuation drill. We do 3 drills a year. All of them, at least one of them is supervised by the fire department to make sure that we're following the right procedure, that our timing to get out the building, students are exiting safely, that these are happening in an appropriate and efficient manner. The last thing is that around the building, so for example, some schools you may evacuate to a certain part, but where you're evacuating to, is it safe for students to stand there? In some cases, is there an exit, is there egress from that location? So you may get everybody out the building, but then if the building is really on fire, are you able to move quickly from there? We recently had an incident at Oakton where our students evacuated from there really quickly, got to their relocation site very fast. Dr. Gorin was on the scene right then and that day to be able to support and witness that efficiency of movement. In our next one, we definitely are engaged in bus evacuations, so we want to make sure that our students know how to respond. We work with our transportation department and different staff members in each of our building to make sure that we know and our students know how to handle a situation where on a bus, because there are instances where there may be an accident or there may be a situation on the bus where students have to exit really quickly. And this is a routine one that's also managed every year and have been completed in almost all of our schools. Disaster severe weather drills. We call this one a code white. In our code white or disaster drill, it's a lockdown where we want to make sure that the perimeter is safe and that our students are entering into code white can have a code white secure and teach, or code white there's a disaster, there's a weather, so you would actually follow code white with an actual direction. So secure and teach, or you may say code white, it's a tornado drill, weather emergency. So depending on the type of code white, essentially we're saying we're locking the perimeter, and then here's the next direction for you, right? And so it's a direction that involves a couple other steps. So in a code white, you may enter, you shouldn't be entering a building if it's a code white. And if there is a code white in the building, the direction may either be that the staff can continue teaching because we know that it's the perimeter secure, or they may be saying, move to your disaster drill locations or a tornado, and there are plans where staff are expected to move their classes to. The last, there's 2 more, which are intruder lockdown drills. So this is our standard operating procedure for a, thank you. Why didn't you? In our intruder lockdown drill, this is a standard current practice that's been accepted right now. For about a year, we've been thinking about through this, but this year we continued in collaboration with our Evanston Police Department to use this drill. I'll tell you in a few minutes about our update to this, but it has been the code red lockdown drill. Essentially, the goal of this drill is to be as quiet and almost invisible as possible. And I know in our kindergarten classrooms, they turn into a kind of a game to reduce the stress of it, but it's really like we're quiet, we're hiding, we're avoiding any noise. And then throughout the school, if you've ever experienced it, if you were a parent in a building or you experience this, it's really an eerie feeling. And these are supervised by our Evanston Police Department and by our security and safety officer in the district, Harold Manny. And it's really, when I've, for years have been able to walk the building and to supervise this, and you'll go to doors, they're all locked, all doors. When you do this drill, you would lock this door, for example, if you're in the gymnasium or if you're in a cafeteria, you would lock the doors that access that space. If you can, we don't want people fumbling to close, so if you can, as quickly as possible, you'd close your blinds, make sure that the space is completely quiet, locked down, and that way, the whole point of this is to almost in some way evade the intruder's thoughts and thinking about what's happening. So the goal there is to avoid any kind of, reduce the intruder's ability to access people. And so one last thing is that in our drill, we also make sure that as you're getting ready to close your door, you're sweeping the hallway. So if there are children who are walking down the hall, you're saying, come in here for right now. So our priority in this case is to avoid any contact with an intruder. So we're not taking account of every single kid in that point. We're really focusing on making sure every kid is hidden in a space with their class or with another class until you get an all clear. And then the last drill that I'll share about is reverse evacuation drills. So this is a drill that we began 3 years ago, I would say, that I think is an important one, which is that in a code white situation where we want everybody back in the building, we would call for a reverse evacuation drill. So if the students are at lunch or recess, the supervisors are trained to blow a whistle or they'll have some kind of signal to bring all the students back into the building as quickly as possible and away from any threat that may be outside. And we've done this. I was grateful when the district instituted this, and we've continued it. It's not in our Illinois State Code statute to do this drill, but it's an important one because a lot of our activities are outside during the day, and so that we prepare for this is an important thing to note. The last thing I want to highlight in terms of our standard practices right now from our school-based teams is our relocation and reunification. All our principals are charged with really contacting our relocation site every year. At the beginning of the year, it's one of my directions. Make sure you set eyes on the place, you talk to the liaison, you've got contact. We also have secondary sites. So every school has a primary site and a secondary site. So if the first site you're supposed to relocate to in an event of an emergency is not prepared, or something has happened in that building that very day, then you would go to your secondary site. So that's the two things. We coordinate with our transportation department, so they're also prepared if in the event that there needs to be some extra support in terms of busing, we're ready to get there. But all our staff get information about what their site's location are. Secondly, at our sites, the crisis management team has thought through, the principal has thought through, like where would you set up in the event of a relocation where you also have to reunify? Where are you going to have, like, if it's a true emergency, you're going to need to have maybe some additional health support. You, of course, will be working with our fire department at that point in emergency ambulatory services, but we also want to make sure that individuals at that site, maybe there's some scrapes or something like that, so that there's a health location, that there's a social work location for kids or staff or anybody who may be experiencing trauma. We have set up a process where there's a parent reunification table. We want to make sure that there's a media briefing center. We want to make sure that there's an incident command center at any of these situations. So at every one of these, on every one of our crisis management workbook plans, it actually outlines where those rooms would be. So you're not creating these. When the event happens, you're prepared for them, which is part of our expectation. To that end, our district safety team, which is comprised of 9 individuals, and it's actually growing because we also have secondary individuals on these teams. And our districts are members who are charged with thinking about the coordination of all of these factors for both across the district, but also in terms of a school-based plan. And I say both in terms of school-based plan is that in a crisis situation that rises above where, let's say it's a level 2, in other words, it may be an actual fire or we're actually having to step in, I would assume incident commander status. And so I would actually go to the location of the emergency. I would be on site, on scene, or my secondary person, which is Stacy Beersley, would be there to assist in the event of an emergency. We would go to the site. The principal is the first person because they are there. They're the first incident commander. They would essentially turn that over to me, given the level of the gravity of the situation. We would work together, of course, to assess. Is it better for them to remain in the incident commander situation? We would work in tandem to assess that situation. These situations, of course, are very dynamic, and so it's important that we just have the routine and we understand where you would turn things over to. To that end, I was mentioning, so in terms of our relocation, reunification, we have individuals. So for example, Tom Sabin in a relocation, and then his secondary person would go and arrive at the site for relocation if we were expecting a reunification and be putting up signs to help organize a space. So you wouldn't have to get there and say, what was the room number for health? Oh, it's already posted. Where was the student assembly? So as the students, before the students arrive, these signs would be set up in a situation where we were expecting a relocation. Not every situation would demand that, but that's what we will drill for and we will be prepared for. The team, as you see listed here, is cross-departmental team members who work together to make sure that we are prepared. We are also responsible for the communication of across any kind of situation that's going to arise across the district. So making sure that we are prepared to communicate with each other about what are the needs, and then also to our schools or vice versa, so they know to just communicate with us. I put on here Slack. So Slack is our current application. It's an app that uses, it's a, I guess you could say almost like a Twitter, but it's an internal Twitter account essentially where you can communicate really quickly about on-the-scene progress. So if if Dr. Gorin is in this moment the one communicating with the police department, he can be relaying messages. I can be sending a message really quickly to all of our safety teams. They can be asking me questions versus having to pick up the phone and talk to like, okay, hold on a second, let me tell you what's going on. You can accelerate that and help speed up accelerate the speed at which we are talking and communicating our needs. So part of our role as a district safety team is to say, okay, so what do we understand and what do we need to do more of and what do we need to do to improve? It's our role to be worried and to be nervous and to be thinking about how do we improve all the time, because preparation, as you know, is a foundation, and I was a Boy Scout, so being prepared was one of the things that I was always taught to be thinking about. No longer a Boy Scout, and I was not an Eagle Scout, but I was a Boy Scout, and it was important to us. So we are always thinking about this priority. Number one, we want to update our code system. So code red, code green. In talking with the police department, it's really important. The coding system, we want to move to much more plain language, right? So as I was mentioning, code white. So we would go to a lockdown, secure, and teach. Instead of saying code white, we may move to just lock the perimeter, lockdown, secure, and teach. In other words, we want to move away from a coded system. The police department has moved away from code systems, so we'd like to do the same. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be working on very soon to be able to change that language, because the coding system has worked. It's standard. It's appealing. But what if I say code red and I really meant code yellow, right? And so if somebody else does the same mistake, it could be a matter of seconds, and we want to make sure that even while we're drilling, we want to improve. And the police department, the officers we're working with, Officers Wozniak and Arzuaga, that was one of their recommendations. So earlier in the year, I had them review all our plans, and they approved all our plans. They said that they felt very confident, they felt that they were very appropriate. But one of the recommendations for this coming year and our next iteration of plans would be to move to more plain language, which makes sense to me, and I didn't see any, I think it's a good idea. So secondly, we've purchased and we're in the process of getting prepared to distribute new walkie-talkies for all our safety teams, our crisis management teams, and then in buildings with multiple levels, we will assign an individual at each floor to be able to have, let's say there's a key person communicating from each floor in multiple in large buildings, we'll do that. We've procured a Crisis Go app, which will essentially take this document. So our police this is our crisis management workbook plan. And so our police get a binder about this thick. Many of our staff have the binders, but what we'd like to do is move away from the binders into an app that can be much more responsive. We actually had a training today with the District 65 team. The app allows you, so if there's an alert and it says, there's a evacuation at this building for code yellow, which would be a fire, we would then say, you know, we'd hit the alert. It would then send me as the incident commander a checklist of things I need to do, right? And it would send Dr. Gorin a checklist. Everybody on the safety team would get their checklist. School-based staff could also be in that, and they would get their checklist. Teachers could be in that if we wanted to. We haven't, at this point, we're going to be focusing on crisis teams and safety team. We may eventually, there's some questions about, you know, we have to make sure the technology is available to our teachers if we were to do that. But essentially, you're not relying on the checklist of what to do. You should have that already memorized and you're responding. The checklist is really like in that moment, maybe after you say, okay, did I get everything? Or you can use it as a double check. We really should know these internalized, that this is a secondary tool. It's really a communication tool. It would replace Slack completely because you don't want to be sitting there texting. This would allow you to send voice messages. So if I'm, you know, in the ALICE training that I went to, the officers say that, you know, you have to drill because your emotional state becomes so strained in a crisis situation, your dexterity, your ability to respond is reduced. And so the more you drill, the more you have tools that are much more clear, like plain language, like an app that allows you to just press a button and say like, hey, this is the situation, we need to do this, and speak to it versus having to sit there and text and then correct self, and autocorrect kicks in and it's just a mess, you know? So really moving to a much more smooth process, which is why we've accelerated the purchase of walkie-talkies for all our schools. District, just make sure. So we're working, part of our process is to prepare everybody to understand their roles much more deeply. And as a result of that, we will move to district-wide safety tabletop exercises, which essentially we'll be doing drills together as a safety team with the police department and with the Evanston Fire Department to make sure that we're planning for those. Recently, Rafael Bafemi and I met with members of our police department to discuss how do we accelerate access into our buildings in an emergency situation only. So in other words, if there's an emergency situation with a fire or an active shooter, how do our first responders who arrive on the scene, are they prepared to enter quickly? Do they have to press the buzzer to wait for somebody, hey, can you let me in? No, we want to make sure that they have key card access that are appropriately prepared and that they can be able to access the building quickly in a situation like that versus having to wait for somebody to open the door, or they have to, you know, jam the door open because nobody can come and open the door. So we want to accelerate that, and so we've got a plan in place to do that, and I think it'll be a very productive, and of course we'll have kind of protocols set up in place to make sure that all responses understand the use of the access card and it's limited. We've been talking about the last day and really allowing our schools to do a drill where all of our staff can experience relocating to their emergency relocation site. So currently, we've asked principals and crisis management teams to do that. We'd like to do it where we'd like to have all of our school staff experience moving to that site, understand what the location is, how to move there quickly. As a result of our ALICE training, which I'll mention in a few minutes more, it may even include some in the future whole school drills, but that's something that would take a lot of planning and thinking through before we would lift that up. It would not be something in the short future, in the near future. And the last thing that we want to highlight in terms of changes being planned is really the preparation of a parent emergency guide. So what do I do as a parent? So if there's an emergency, there's a code white or they've locked the building, what do I do? What is my response? Do I need to call them and tell them, hey, I read on the news? How do I prepare myself in this situation? If my child is at this school, do I know where the relocation site is? If I don't know, do I trust that the time will come? Understand, because I don't necessarily want to publish to everybody in the public where all our relocation sites are. I think that would not be a prudent safety. I want to keep that confidential. But knowing that if there's an emergency, I know that my children will be transported someplace, and the district will definitely let me know once it is time for me to go there, that this is where the reunification relocation site is. You are to go there, right? Or if there's an active situation, we are working on our response time to make sure that communication is accelerated there.
One of the things, this will run counterintuitive to all of us who are parents, because if we have to go into what's now called a code red lockdown, or we're locked down the building, we don't let children out and we don't let people in. And as a parent of 3 children, if I hear something, the first intuition is I'm going to go drive over to the school and find my kid. And indeed, my kid has already sent me a text So I'm worried about that. And again, that we would never stand in the way of the intuition of a mother or a father, grandparent, an aunt, and an uncle. But the preparation of the emergency guide will, at least in a rational way, explain that when we're locked down, and we will communicate as fast as we can communicate.
So some of the routine safety in our schools that we are repeatedly reminding our schools and our principals and our staff around is really thinking about just regular access, continued conversation with our first responders. Developing that partnership in terms of communication is really a priority, and so we have regular conversations. We're often in touch with each other to make sure that we're understanding. In fact, tomorrow we have a debrief session with Chief Eddington and his team. That is routine for us. So there's a crisis, there's a situation. We need to sit down post to talk about what happened, what could we done differently, what do we need to do next. So that is a routine. When the Oakton evacuation occurred, their crisis management team sat down, reflected on what happened, what can we do better, and then a district safety team at our last safety team meeting also reflected on what Oakton team as a crisis team had said, and then our next meeting, we are hoping to have it at Oakton so that we can work on some district collaboration there. Really also just reminding all our staff always that the doors on all our buildings are locked and checked, and that we're checking them throughout the day. We also are encouraging and reminding everybody that we should always be wearing our IDs. This may seem like a simple, or you may just I just forgot it. No, this is a really helpful tool. We remind our principals and our school personnel that this is a really helpful tool. It's the prevention. Right? This is a prevention for an intruder being in the building without our knowledge. And so when you don't wear it, it's about habit, right? So, if we always see everybody have it and then somebody's not wearing it, like, oh, that person's not wearing it. Whereas if we're laissez-faire about it, then when the person's in the building and nobody sees it, then no one's going to think about it. So just reminding our staff that this is really important. The ID badge is important. And when we have visitors in the building, make sure that they're getting a visitor badge. I remember a couple of years ago, there's somebody in the building and people around, they're like, there's a visitor in the building, we don't know who they are, and so immediately everybody was attuned to it and responding to it. So talking with the staff is something we do. And that they're getting guest passes when they enter the building. We do, in terms of our visitor pass, we are looking at some systems that would allow for a much faster way to get a visitor pass when you enter a building. Part of that might include maybe some background check as well. And so we have some thoughts and concerns to make sure that it also, we don't want to dissuade families from entering the building because they have to get a background check. That's intimidating, but there may be some crisis because there are times where we want to make sure that those who are entering our building have a right to be, that they are safe, and there are situations that could be potentially challenging, and we want to make sure that we are actively thinking about how do we prevent anybody who could, enter a building and do harm to our child who's not entering the building. So that would be the priority with that. The second thing is that, Dr. Gordon has really brought this to our team's attention as a crisis team, and really thinking about promoting some awareness about this idea of if you see something, say something, and really developing some shared language, and we really appreciate that, and I think it's something we'll be very soon enacting. Our immediate priority.
I believe, let me also just underscore the routines, because safety is our responsibility, and we will stand tall and continue to do what we have to do. But it's really everybody's responsibility, and so the idea that we are all wearing our IDs, and that visitors should be wearing IDs, and that if somebody isn't, to stop and ask them, may I help you? Why are you here? Can you go check in at the office? These are things that have to be part of our routine, as has to be the several times a day checking that the doors are locked. Raphael and team have been working with our custodians to make sure that those rounds are going on a regular basis during the workday.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of our immediate priorities is to adopt a different response to an active shooter situation. The Alice model, there are lots of models around the country. There is, out of Columbine, a different model. But the Alice model is the one that our Evanston Police Department has adopted for for our city personnel. And so because we work so closely with them, felt that this was the model to go with as well for our schools. And so we are planning and have already begun the process of Alice training being our next model for an active shooter response. It is a tool that's been research-based and has been used around. There is controversy around it, but we really believe that that we can work with our Evanston Police Department in terms of making sure that it's appropriate for our children in kindergarten through 5th grade and through 8th grade to make sure that we have it set up in a way that can be really responsive and can get our staff. The most important thing in an ALICE training model is to make sure that the training is helping the adults be prepared to shepherd and protect our children. That is the most important thing, because we're really expecting our adults to have the flexibility of mind to be prepared to respond in a dynamic way in an active shooter situation. So number one, we're partnering with the Evanston Police Department. Number two, the district safety team went through the training last week and participated in the ALICE model training. We are next going to be working to have all our school-based crisis management teams be prepared for it. So they will participate next in groups of 33. We'll go through the training. And then last, our goal will be to have all our staff participate. And we have a goal to do it on the last day of the school year. Our plan is to prepare to do a school district-wide training where all staff members will participate. That is still being worked out. So our goal is to have as many as possible. Our goal is to have all, but we have to wait to see how many training officers we'll have prepared for that day. I do think that will also include then changing our active, our workbooks will need to be updated to reflect that model. And as a result of that, there's a big lift in the next couple months, because I'd like to see us be able to have that in teachers' hands over the summer so that they can be prepared and be thinking about what their support is. And again, it's what is our individual response. The advantage of the ALICE model, which stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. What it really does is it says that the core of this philosophy is that you're really thinking about what are you doing in that very situation? Are you aware of where the intruder is? Are you thinking about what your next move is? Rather than being kind of in a hidden situation, simply hiding may be the best response at that point. So lockdown, code red, the way we practice now, may be the best response. But if there's an opportunity to leave this door because the individual is on that side of the building and move out of there quickly enough, that is what you should do. And so rather than sit here waiting even though the person is right there. So in this model, it really forces the individual to really be much more reflective and much more instinctual of what we would do, this run or fight or hide approach, to be much more prepared for that. Rafael, did you want to talk? Okay. I know that in districts that, I think Mr. Obafemi came from a district that used ALICE training. And drilled it regularly and was very successful there in terms of planning preparedness.
And if there is, these are always very difficult things to say, but if there is an active shooter on one of our campuses, the police will be there, the SWAT team will be there, and they will be doing their job. And so part of the ALICE training is how to move as fast as possible, given the responsibilities of the police in those really high-pressured situations.
That's a really good reminder also that was one of the reasons why we moved to thinking about access, key access, which is for our police department, is that patrols, if you think about, we have 2 SROs and then you have active duty police officers throughout the city of Evanston, right? And so I remember at Dewey, there was a button there's an emergency button that you would have. And so a student, had run under a desk and actually had pushed the button. And literally within 2 minutes, I had a call, and the police were outside the door saying, "Hey, we're here, is everything okay?" And so that was in about 2 minutes that happened. And so, it's really important to know that part of the reason why we want to do this key card is because we want to say, once you're there, if you have to buzz the door to get in the building, that's another thing. So this was just to make this faster. Safety is preparedness. Our final, thought is just really thinking about safety. We're really concerned safety is preparedness. Our drills and our protocols and our exercises. Safety is if you see something, say something. The awareness and sharing involved in that. Safety is the relationships. I did not focus on that. You've heard this year already about school climate work, and really we recognize that the relationships are really the foundation of safety, and they're really building this culture of social and emotional learning, and that we see that as a foundation for safety. It is important that is on the front end of all this. So prevention is really about recognizing that we all need to feel that we're part of this community, and the better we are attuned at each other, the more we can look out for each other and intervene and support each other. And then the last is safety is communication. Really believing that at the core of all this, on communication at all levels, across the district, within our schools, and most importantly for our children, recognizing that they have a place where they can say what they need to say about their sense of safety, their sense of feeling connected, and their sense of angst that may occur for them.
Thank you. You want any questions? I just wanted to know, you mentioned that Alice, there's some controversy with it. Is it simply the assumption that I'm making that in order to drill, counter, and evacuate, you may end up role-playing with children the active shooter part and thinking through steps that you maybe don't get to in a simple lockdown?
Yeah.
Then the anxiety that might provoke?
That is, so the kind of the perception is that you may do those kinds of drills with children. We would never, at this point, I haven't seen anything that would ask us to drill with children in those like a counter or a fight situation. Right. We would focus on the staff being prepared. The children may, my initial experience with Alice was that the instructor would say that, at that moment, the staff member has to be prepared to say to the students, for example, pick up, or if there was a counter moment, to say, take off your shoes and throw it, and allowing the staff the understanding that that's something they could do versus just sitting and hiding. So it's really focused on, the Alice training is really focused on the adults prepare to support the children in those situations.
And one aspect is countering. There are other aspects, which is how to mobilize your kids and move as fast as you possibly can to evacuate the building. We've gone through the training. It's anxiety provoking. There's no other way to say it. On the other side, it teaches intuition that you don't know you have. So that we had an exercise the other day where we were literally the adults running out of the building. We used our warehouse, and when the police officers came back to us, because they gave us these are scenarios. They gave us some instructions, and then they asked, "Did anybody say call 911?" And of course, we're in a scenario, but no, nobody said call 911 because you were running as fast as you can. So the second and third time that we did the rep, we ended up having somebody say, "Who called 911?" Again, in a scenario, but it's this sort of work that builds intuition to move as fast as you can to save lives.
And I know one of the controversies that you're referring to, the counterpart of Alice, teaching students to attack gunmen, because that's never been done before. It's an unproven tactic. So that is one of the controversies. And I think in our training, we would not involve kids to do that.
Not kids.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
So again, I want to thank you for your thoughtful approach to safety in our school district. I mean, I think it's very well thought out, and I appreciate the work the district's doing alongside the other institutions like the Evanston Fire Department as well as the Evanston Police Department to make sure that we work in collaboration as a community to ensure that all our children are safe. One of the things I'd like to see a little bit more elaboration on is what would be the social, emotional, or trauma supports that we have if something, God forbid, would like this would occur. I'd like to see, how do we mobilize social workers, our psychologists to respond?
We have a crisis team that we have had in place for a number of years, so that whenever there's a problem at any school, we go out for any situation. So there's a number of social workers and psychologists on that team. And we have a binder of all sorts of materials, from everything you can imagine, that we could address if there was a problem.
And first and foremost is making sure that we can identify what the problem is, and if we have to evacuate, we will evacuate. So the situation in Oakton a couple weeks ago, we had basically a surge protector blew, and there was no fire, there was no active, the fire department came, but it smelled as though there was a fire. And so the principal, Mr. Williams, said, we're going to evacuate and we're going to go to our relocation site. And they moved really fast. And we were able to solve the problem quickly, bring the kids back. But they moved really fast with confidence and order in what was a scary time. And that's what's really important. After we do that sort of evacuation, then the question of where do the adults or the kids need some social emotional support, and that's where the crisis team that Joyce is talking about really kicks in, and that's absolutely important after we evacuate.
Thank you. One last question and support from me, or a suggestion. I know in a number of districts, a number of communities, the police and fire department, on regular patrol, will find time in a certain sequence to maybe once a month visit a school, and that's for a few reasons. One is to practice the key card access, making sure that they can get into a building, check in at the office, be seen, but also to be able to walk the floor plan and get a general familiarity with the buildings, just in case they ever were called in an emergency. They have some sense, or they build capacity in the department for some sense of knowing the facilities that are in the community. Has that come up in your discussions with them at all?
It actually did, and when we met to talk about the key access, one of the things I invited them to do is to consider doing some training also sequences, so both regular visiting of the buildings, but also to plan for some active drills in the buildings during the summer months when the buildings are not occupied, so it's not something you would do now, but to also to encourage a regular visit of the buildings. I don't want to overwhelm. There's a lot of police officers, so I'm figuring out an appropriate pacing for that. So
building capacity.
Exactly, building capacity and not overwhelming. And it's like, oh, we've got tons of police and fire walking through our building, and so just thinking about to do it in a way that's progressively appropriate and encouraging and creates confidence versus anxiety.
Right.
But I like this idea of a regular, set up a schedule, and we're doing that, so.
One of the things I want to recognize what Andalip said. We have a direct line of communication with Chief Eddington at Evanston Police, with Chief Scott, who's the Evanston Fire Department chief, and then, as important, the deputies. And so, and that line of communication is texting when something is happening, direct line phone calls. As Andalip says, tomorrow we're going to go and do a normal debrief from the situation last week in and around Northwestern. So we'll actually take that as a lesson, lessons learned, so we can move forward. But both chiefs and their respective departments are at, when we call, they're able and willing to help us, and we trust that in an emergency situation that we can work together well as teams. And I just want to salute both departments. They have the tough job of being the first responders, and they've been supportive to us all the time, basically.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask one more question. So again, in regards to ensuring that all buildings, again, all buildings are locked down. So again, and the reason why I ask is again that there's at Dawes, my children's school, I mean, we have an annex, right? And all our little ones are there, our first graders, kindergarten, and it doesn't have a vestibule, but it is, but it is locked, right? I mean, I just want to make sure that the policy is that we make sure that the only way you're going to enter is by using your district ID.
So yes, the doors are locked, and all the doors have locks on them. Honestly, though, as we head into the spring,
the warmer months,
you prop open the door to get some fresh air, and that's absolutely understandable. Yeah. But not in this day and age. And so that's where we've been encouraging our custodians 2 to 3 times a day to do the rounds outside, to look at the doors, make sure that they're shut. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to, over time, encourage our administrators and our educators and our support staff to really pay attention. If you see something, say something. If you see an open door, close it.
Are there any other buildings like that that are annexes to schools? They're going to have into all the schools. But,
I think Dawes may be the only one.
I think Dawes is the only.
There are many of our schools that have numerous doors. If you go to Washington, you go to Lincolnwood. Those are schools that, again, down the long, in Washington, you go down the long hall, and then they sort of have the classrooms in the round. Mm-hmm. And again, in those situations, we're going to have to change routine, because again, all of us like to prop open a door just to get the fresh air, and that has to change.
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo thank you for the thoughtful work, you know, far beyond this presentation, the actual work that you all are putting into making sure that everyone is prepared and prioritizing the upcoming trainings for everyone as well. My comment is relatively small in the context of all of the preparations that are incredibly important and difficult to do, but important. But this emphasis on developing a new electronic visitor check-in, I'm having some concerns about any element of background check in terms of intent versus impact. One, because background checks often don't catch a lot of, don't necessarily catch or predict certain behaviors. So I'm just wondering in terms of folks feeling comfortable in being in our buildings and not feeling like it's an invasive process. How we are thoughtful about what that entails and being really clear in disclosing that. And also what information we have about how predictive the elements of the background check are. Yeah, my concern is just that there are folks who may be of concern who may have a completely clean record. And then there's folks who may have something on their background check that they're sensitive about, but does not necessarily predict any nefarious intent for being in the building. And now we have that, the school has that information and they're in the position to disclose that. So.
If I can address that, the issue is that of liability for the district. So the kind of background check that we are talking about is whether someone is on a sex offender list, whether someone has been convicted of murder of a young child or things like that, and also about custody dispute. So if we knowingly allow someone with that, those individuals with those kind of background into our building, and God forbid something happens, then it opens the district up to liability of not doing due diligence in protecting the interest of children and the community. Those are the things that we're talking about. So the firms that do this, they check publicly available data periodically, and to make sure that those individuals do not have the ability to walk freely in the buildings. They'll still be able to enter a building, but what will happen is there'll be a concerted effort by an administrator to restrict their movement. So it's not people who haven't done anything, people who have a record, and just to make sure that they don't reoffend our children. It's an issue of our liability.
I understand what Anya's saying. I mean, if you're able to isolate certain things, that's wonderful, but there's certainly a large part of our population, people who don't have IDs and
undocumented.
Creating barriers to the school community that are just in addition to other barriers that may exist. We definitely would want to know, I would want to know, in whatever the recommendation is, how we are supporting making sure that we're not causing undue burdens to part of the community that already feels marginalized or has a hard time getting access to the
I think we
building.
can learn something from our colleagues in security over at the high school who have the system. I mean, so when you check in, you have to have an ID, and I don't want to make assumptions for them, but as Suni just said, there are many of our neighbors who might not be citizens or might not have documentation. And so we'd have to make sure that the doors are open, but that we're doing the right screening. And there's a fine line here, and I think the high school can help us.
Yeah, but the parents that go to a high school are different than the parents that go to kindergarten.
Correct.
Correct.
And I, on the liability issue, right now, for example, like I volunteer with the like Everybody Reads program, and volunteers who are regularly going to be working with students do have to go through a background check here already. I mean, frankly, from a liability standpoint, having the system in place, and then if something doesn't get caught, that is where the knowingly allowing somebody to be in contact with children would kick in, as opposed to not having it. So I would push back on the liability reasoning for the system a little bit. I do think, safety is relationships. I mean, I think that is absolutely correct. And so if we are creating a system where we might be limiting or damaging those relationships, I think we just have to think about that. I'm not saying that the electronic check-in, that we shouldn't explore it, but I do think we should weigh it against what we're saying about our buildings. If we have a focus on community schools. We want parents to feel engaged and welcome in our schools, and yet if we have this kind of a system in place, it doesn't really gel with that notion.
Well,
so I think we just have to understand that it's a trade-off and make sure that we are really thoughtful about what is the safety concern, and is this really going to be addressing that safety concern, or is it going to create other safety concerns because we're damaging the relationship aspect?
Absolutely. Currently, our practice is that you have to turn in an ID if you enter a building anyway,
Right.
of some sort, right? So, and so I think that to your point and to what everybody's point is that, number one, nothing would be rolled out in a way that creates you have to stand here and before, I'm not going to let you in until you're approved. We don't currently do that, so I wouldn't say why we would. So that's why I said this is something that's going to be looked through and really thought about, because absolutely the points on the table are what was our, Raphael and I were discussing and really thinking about. We have to really think through this to make sure it fits and it's not a barrier. I think the most important thing is the first person who's welcoming the person. What's that next conversation they have with somebody? That I think is are there opportunities for people to enter the building? Or what are the opportunities for volunteering in the building? Are we welcoming people? Or is there communication between our teachers and parents? And so I think there's a lot of, I would agree completely that we have to make sure that we address what's been put out there. And it was one of our thoughts is making sure that we are thinking through that. And we would never, in any of our schools, plan to introduce something that would create this oh, I'm going to get caught, or this perception. That is absolutely not what we would want to do. At the same time, we've got to think about, just like we have these badges, when we introduced the visitor badge ID system in this district, people were concerned. But I have to tell you, teachers were much more relieved. I had many teachers come up and say, I'm so glad we're doing this, and we're really doing this, because I felt very nervous without it. Because I'd see people in the building, I wouldn't know who they are, and so this was really argued for in a lot of ways. And so I think it's about the planning, and we would definitely consider everything that the board members have shared this evening in our execution.
And another variable that I wanted us to look at is also custody issue, because we've had incidents just this year where we don't know who is supposed to be able to have contact with a minor child. The non-custodial parents, who is not supposed to, shows up and wants to take the child. Now, this allows us to have that information on the ready and prevent something where a parent who's not supposed to have a child checks a child out and takes a child away. So that's another thing I want us to think about.
Yeah. So I just want to be clear, I'm not comfortable with a sex offender in the building. I'm not comfortable with someone who does not have custody rights being in the building, right? If those things have been determined, then that should be extended. Those barriers should be extended in our school buildings. Right. So I just want to be very clear that that's not in question for me. I think it should be clear for parents. But I'm not concerned when I have to hand over my ID, because I've never had a background check issue, right? And so I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who maybe 20 years ago shoplifted and doesn't necessarily want.
That would not come up.
Right, and so but they don't know that, right? Like if they think that the school runs background checks whenever you come in the building, I don't want, somebody to say, I don't necessarily want to go up and talk to my child's teacher, or I don't really feel, want to go to the office because I don't want them knowing all of my business. And the reality is our country doesn't have a history of fair policing and fair legal implementation. So for some people, there's just a lot of suspicion whenever you get these systems involved. Like, are you retaining my information? Where's my information gonna go? Et cetera. So I just think that we have to be very clear. If we're going to say something like parents are gonna get background checks, we need to be very clear what information is being received, how it's being stored, like disclosing that to people in order to not create a false barrier. But in the cases where children are threatened, the gravity of this entire presentation is just difficult to hear, right? And so I would hope that we don't have to deal with any of these situations, including a custody case. So that's not the question for me. It's for those people who want to be engaged in the school but may be deterred. How do we get that accurate information in their hands and make sure that we haven't unintentionally created a barrier or a consequence that we didn't think about?
Just want to clarify, it's not a background check. It's not a background. It's a visitor management system. There are certain codes in the school code, in Illinois school codes, that we're supposed to protect our children from. Sex offenders, people who've done serious crime to minors, and then custody issues. Those are the things they're checking for. Someone who's gotten a ticket, someone who's been incarcerated before, for nothing related to those three issues, they would not be prevented from going into a school.
And nor citizenship status either.
No, that's not even. There are provisions in the system to accept things like maculares, which are Mexican-issued driver's IDs, for example. I'm just using that as an example. Or any foreign ID that is not U.S. will still be processed. It doesn't prevent someone from entering our building. There's a provision for that in the system.
And I think we hear the concerns, and so that's very helpful for feedback, and it's a great conversation to have with our colleagues at the high school just to see what parameters they're using, because that's the system they're using. And then we meet with the police chief tomorrow too. We can actually talk a little bit with him, and we can think about this. Again, more than anything, we want people to be identified as welcome in the schools, and the welcome in the schools for staff is to wear this badge with honor and pleasure, and for visitors to have a visitor pass of some sort, whatever the school is designated, whether it's a lanyard or a clip-on or something. Because we want to make sure that we're safe, and that's our highest goal.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ditto what Joy said, that parent involvement and engagement at the high school level is different than likely what we're looking to see at the elementary level, and that parents are anticipating to see. So I just wonder if there's other stakeholder groups or that can be spoken with.
I want to know what the system is and what it's checking, because it's checking something. When you give your ID and you get your little picture back or whatever, it's checking something.
And I think, too, it's worth pointing out that at the high school, it's a security team that is implementing that system, as opposed to at our schools, it would be the school secretary, presumably. And that's just a different relationship, obviously, that they have with parents and families that would be potentially shifted. So again, I think no one is disputing the need to keep certain people away from children. It's just we need to make sure that what we're doing is going to accomplish that, and do it in a way that isn't going to discourage parents that we do want to come into the school and feel welcome into the school from no longer feeling that way. Were there any other questions?
So just another comment about that. I think as you're talking about accounting for who's in the building, it's important for us to make sure that our visitors are taken care of. So when I think about who's in our building, if we're accounting for our students, we should be accounting for our visitors too. And I know the McGaw YMCA has a similar check-in system for visitors who are not members. So I'm thankful that that practice is something that's being considered. It's important that we know who's in our building at all times. I appreciate the preparation for the parent emergency guide. I think we really need to think of our parents as partners. I also appreciate the simplification of the language. So when my kid comes home and she tells me it's, we had a code yellow. Sometimes for me, it's difficult to remember that. So I think being able to have the same language for everybody is really important. As far as communication, I think that the incident that took place last week is, something that we can all learn from. By the time that I got the message from District 65, my kid was already in front of me. And I know that there's so many moving pieces, but I do appreciate the communication that came out of Northwestern, and that it was quick, to the point, and really, I think, made the community just feel at ease. Like, we have the situation under control. This is where the incident is taking place. Stay away. So just as we're considering communication for this, I think that as a parent, I entrust you with my kid, and the most important thing that you can do for me is just let me know that there is an incident, that the best thing that I could do is stay away and let you take care of the situation. But I want to know from us when that's happening. Social media has made it so easy for information to go out, and I think that the most credible source should be us. So as we're thinking about communication. And then the last piece that I wanted to mention as we're talking about safety in social and emotional learning is this piece of training for our kids in say something when you see something before it happens. So the piece about this helping kids understand when you see some sort of behavior from your peers, or maybe even your teacher or somebody around the building. I think that that's an important piece of the training that's not going to happen during ALICE. So whether it's in the middle schools, advisory classes, or I don't know where it would fit in the elementary, at the elementary schools, but I think it's important part of our training to be having these conversations with our kids, to be kind to other people, to include others, to when you see a sign of distress coming from another student, how do you handle that? And I think that that's a really important piece that's going to happen far before an incident takes place. And I would love to see it considered in the training.
It's a great idea. I was thinking actually we could easily incorporate it as a start of the year cool tool. So all of our students participate in various activities at the beginning that you kind of learn the PBIS culture. And so maybe one of them is instituted where the whole district, everybody participates in something as you described. Thank you for all.
Right. I know it's happening, but I think that we need to be more explicit about it now. And if you see something, say something, it's always geared towards the adults. And I think that our children have a different viewpoint, like even just from their physical viewpoint is different than ours. The things that they see are different than the things that we see. So as part of the training, I think that's really important.
Thank you for all those comments. They're very, very helpful on just thinking about routines when we check visitors in. If you have 10 badges and you only have 8 back, then where are the other 2? And so somehow we have to, I'm a visual learner, so I'd have to see it all hanging up to be able to tell the incident command that we're still missing 2 people, so that's important. On the communication, I reached out to Alan Anderson, our colleague in Northwestern, who has now connected me with the head of security on the applications that they use to be able to get information out to their entire community. We have the capacity, we think, with what we have in our system, but we're going to learn from them as well to be even more prepared on direct communication.
Are we limited in text messaging? I haven't seen any text communication come from the district, and while I appreciate the voicemail message that's coming through, sometimes a text message is just so much easier to read than actually listening to a voicemail.
And that's what I believe Northwestern had a constant flow of information that was coming out, and so we want to look into that. We were limited in the last round of applications in terms of our text messaging. I don't know with the application we have now how fast we can move.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's distressing to know that we have to talk about these things, but I think especially given what's been happening recently, it was really important to have this discussion. So thank you for preparing this.
Undeliev's leadership is extraordinary in this because he comes to it with multiple lenses as a principal, as a parent now, and also as a chief administrator. So it's been really helpful as we move towards better planning and better execution to have Undelief in the lead here.
So as you say that, one really quick comment from the district safety team, because you acknowledge that Undelief has a different perspective, I'm just curious, all of these people that are on the district safety team are out of sight of this school. So are there like principals, teachers who make up the additional safety team that in the school?
At the school, yeah. And again, we need to have a team. God forbid, again, if there's an emergency at one of our sites, we need to be on the site. Somebody has to be on the site. Somebody has to be here communicating. Somebody has to be sort of in between, and then we have to set up whatever sort of recovery procedures that we have. And so that's what the district team is. And then the school team, there's a similar version at the school level.
So the school team really is the initial hub. So school crisis management team is comprised of teachers, principals, social workers, health clerk, secretaries, assistant principals if there is one, and they together essentially drill and prepare. Our district safety team works in tandem to support their planning process. So we essentially kind of become the hub around that school's planning. District safety team we've had alternates, but we're planning to have go three deep. So it's like myself, another person, and then a third person, because we want to make sure that in the event of an emergency, we can have multiple people prepared in those situations.
Okay, thank you.
And our safety response plan is really centered on the school plan. And so it's really centered on what do we do to serve the needs of the school in a crisis situation and the community. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any committee reports or upcoming work?
I just wanted to give, it looks like Katrina's gone, just give a shout out to the Head Start team for all and everyone who supported the Head Start team during last week's compliance visit. There was just an incredible amount of work from them in scheduling everything and making sure that all stakeholders knew what was going on. And I was just incredibly impressed, and I really appreciated also the opportunity to hear again from parents about their experience of the Head Start program and the Head Start team. And so I think kudos to everyone on cabinet who supported them, and also just to the Head Start team for their work.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And then we have some FYI items, and everyone looked at those. And so, all right, then with that, I adjourn this meeting at 8:55 p.m. Thank you, everybody.